Welcome to the Professor Network. Today we've got with us Dr. Roxane Itier, who is an associate professor of cognitive neuroscience at the university and is a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair as well. Dr. Itier, thank you so much for taking the time out to do this.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Dr. Itier, you run the Face and Social Cognition Lab at UW, and from the little I've read about it, it sounds ridiculously interesting. Could you talk to me about the research you conduct and what the lab generally does?
Yes, absolutely. So the question we address is really the information that the brain is extracting from the face and how that ties in with more general higher social cognition processes. So my questions are more specifically related to the face, and we use a technique called event-related potential, which is a neural recording. So it's derived from EEG, electroencephalography. And we basically have three main axes in my lab. So generally speaking, the processing of facial identity. So how do I, make the difference between Joe and Roxane? The processing of facial expression, which is really important for social interaction. So with the idea that, if you start looking weird, scared, or angry, I'm going to change my behavior, right? So me being able to decode the information from the face is really important to carrying on successful social interaction. And we also study gaze processing, which is the same thing. So if you start looking at your feet while you're interviewing me, I'm going to infer that you're not really interested in what I'm saying, or if you look at the ceiling, right? So this engagement in eye contact is really crucial for successful social interaction. I have an interest in a little bit of the disorders that can show some weird processes or abnormal processes, and especially people on the autism spectrum disorder who seem to have issues with face identity recognition and facial expression and gaze processing. But this is like a little bit of a branch outside. So we've done a little bit of that, but I'm not a clinician, so we're doing as a research aspect, and it's actually quite difficult to do.
I can imagine. That's so fascinating, and I can imagine that, because it sounds to me like the research you do is about eye contact and how we perceive other people to feel about us and stuff, and how that could be really different now that interactions are through Zoom calls.
That's right.
Will that affect the way we perceive other people's emotions towards us? I feel like that would change. So that's really interesting. What are some of the projects you're working on right now in the lab?
So right now we're finishing up projects. Simply we're finishing them up because everything has stopped, as you know, because of COVID. So I'm not going to say we're continuing, or we're really trying to wrap up a couple of projects. One of them is really on gaze processing and its implication for decoding empathy and a theory of mind. So being able to basically understand what the other person may be feeling or thinking through eye gaze. So this is kind of specific, and again, it's using the ERP techniques. That's really the neural aspect of it. We have another project on autism, actually, that is finishing as well. So this one was about facial facial identity recognition, and the role of the eyes in face recognition. And this has been done in the neurotypical population as well as in a small group of individual on the autism spectrum disorder. And I have another line of research that is a little bit, it's in collaboration with Heather Henderson in the development area. And this is through another graduate student that we have. And this is more working or looking at the neural correlate of self-relevance and how that impacts the processing of, memory and attention. So, and again, the underlying questions are the link with, some of the personality traits for the children here. So more social cognitive aspects of it. So I think something that is quite hard for students or for anybody to understand is that when you see a face or when you see a visual, a picture, your brain extracts this information extremely fast. Mm-hmm. So you're capable of knowing who you're talking to in less than 250 milliseconds. And so that's why I'm focusing on this early timeline, because this is when the brain is extracting most of the relevant information. After that, those informations are relayed and definitely involved in more social cognitive processes. So now I know that basically you're looking at me and then I'm going to start thinking, well, what is she thinking about? Like, is she paying attention? Maybe she's thinking, but now she's smiling, So those are more like later cognitive processes, basically. So with ERP, we can basically track online what the brain is doing in terms of the early decoding and then the more later processes that are more socially oriented. Hopefully that makes sense.
Oh, it was fascinating. I'm so glad you went into so much detail, and I can't wait to read about all of your findings from these projects. What sparked the interest in this area? Why did you pick neuroscience?
Well, my background is extremely different, I would say, from the general background. I did my undergrad in molecular biology and genetics, actually. Oh. So I'm not really a psychologist by training. Mm-hmm. And I switched because I was really fascinated by the brain, and I really wanted to know more about the human brain and its link to behavior. So my interest in psychology was from a brain perspective always. And then I discovered the fascinating areas of psychology in general, which if I could, I just would go back to school and relearn everything, from the beginning, because this is so fascinating. But yeah, this is like my view. I would say the interest in the face particularly, and in the eyes in particular, is coming from my master. Really, when I was doing my master, I started working with babies, doing more like basic psychology question. And then again, my interest was, so what's behind that baby behavior? What's the brain correlates of that behavior? And I was fascinated by the importance of the face. Like, the face is so dynamic. There's so much you can extract, right? I mean, I'm talking about identity, emotion, and gaze, but you can extract gender, you can extract age, you can recognize people 20, 30 years later, even if they have lost tons of weight or gained tons of weight. There's this absolute amazing dynamicity of those processes that was fascinating to me. And the eyes convey so much, right? I mean, you all can relate to the fact that, you look at people's eyes to really connect. And I was just absolutely amazed by how important that was in the early developmental trajectory. Then I switched more to adults and studied more adults, but my interest, I actually did my PhD in development with ERP, which is, so yeah, my background is kind of diverse, but I was just interested in the brain from the get-go. Okay.
That's absolutely fascinating. Thank you for telling me about that. Now, I know you did most of your education in France, so how did you end up here in Waterloo?
Well, I got my, I did my undergrad, so on molecular biology and genetic in Grenoble in France. And then I had the amazing opportunity to do a year at McGill University. So still gaining my my last year of undergrad, basically, which I can't remember exactly the equivalent. I think that was for my licence or for my master. Honestly, I can't remember. It was so long ago. But I had the opportunity to basically take courses that I could not have taken in Grenoble, and that were more brain oriented. And I just discovered the Canadian system, which I really liked. And then I went back to France, did my master in really cognitive psychology, and then moved down to Toulouse in France to do my PhD with EEG and kids and focusing on face processes. And so I wanted to stay in this area, but I wanted to go back to North America. I always wanted to live outside, actually, of France, and then I got the job at Waterloo, so I was really excited.
Well, you're so glad that you decided to stay here in Waterloo. We're very lucky.
Thank you.
Well, one final question. We know that a lot of students volunteer as research assistants in professors' labs as their primary means of gaining research experience. For these students, what would be your advice so that they can gain the most out of this experience?
So, yeah, I would say I encourage students to start early and do volunteer work, or we have those amazing courses, either independent studies or research apprenticeship, which I discovered a lot of undergrad didn't know about. And it's really too bad because it's an amazing opportunity to spend so many hours in a given lab over the course of a term. And if you accumulate that and you change lab, you actually get a diverse experience, working with different researchers who have different questions and different tools to address those questions. So I think it's very rich, but you cannot have that richness if you don't try and do all of that volunteer work. So I would say I encourage students to do that. And a big thing to really think about is if they start thinking about, research and they really are interested in research, definitely do a honor thesis. That really is the most a compelling experience you can have related to research, because you start with your own question, you start getting, the data, like programming your experiment, getting the data, diving into a specific literature. And and I think at the end of the day, it's really telling you whether you're meant for it or not, which I think is an important thing to answer, right? For students who don't really know, who are interested, but don't really know whether they want to continue that as an academic. I think this is really the answer. If you love it, then go for graduate school. If you don't like it so much, then it's probably not for you. Yeah, so I really encourage undergraduate to volunteer in labs. That's the best way to really know what research is all about. And it's great to have them.
Well, we're always really happy to work in your labs. It's a fascinating experience. So thank you so much for talking to me. This has been
Thank you for having me.
Sure.
All right. Thanks a lot.